we're looking at Joseph, and we looked at how, a couple of days ago when Potiphar's wife, she had something on him, she had his cloak. And I'm sure that would have resonated with some of you over how people hold things on you, and the desire to justify yourself can be overwhelming, but we've got to leave it in God's hands. But he was blessed in prison. He was blessed. The captain of the guard, the guy in charge, the prison's number one honcho, he just put Joseph in charge of everything. Whether Potiphar said something to him, we really don't know. But he saw something in Joseph that really blessed him, and so he put him in charge. And so God's getting Joseph in the right place. And it's still going down, really, in a sense. Joseph doesn't know anything about this yet. So we're into today's verses, Genesis 40 and verse 3. Let me read it to you. This is the captain of the guard. So he put them... let me go back a little bit. I've missed a bit out because I'm not doing the whole story. What's happened while he's been in prison is Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, he got angry one day with his butler and with his baker and threw them in prison. All of this is happening because God is about to put Joseph in a place of authority, in a place of influence, where he can preserve his family. That's what this is all about. This goes back to the dreams. God is working it all out, and he's putting his people in position so that when he gives Pharaoh the dream, Joseph will be promoted. And Joseph doesn't know this. He knows nothing about this at all. And we don't know what's going on. God doesn't give us the ability to know everything that's happening. So let me read this verse to you. This is Pharaoh. He put them in prison. So he put them in custody. That's the butler and the baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison. Then the last little phrase is so significant. The place where Joseph was confined. Now look at that little phrase. Because if you had that phrase on its own, it sounds of bondage. It sounds of no choice, no liberty, no freedom, constriction. The place where Joseph was confined. And sometimes we allow our circumstances, we allow what's happened to us, maybe our health, maybe our finances. Take our health, for example. Imagine you had to go to hospital, you got some news and you had to go in for a checkup. Really, we can say, yes, I'm binding this up, I'm believing God for healing, and we do that. But what if God had somebody in the hospital bed already arranged for you to talk to in the same ward, and nobody told them about Jesus? They've gone through something. The mother just died. I'm making up this story, by the way. They're in a hospital bed, and God wants somebody to be put beside them. Would it not be possible that he could use circumstances to arrange for you to be in that bed? I'm just pulling that out of the air. That's what happened with Joseph. It looks like he's going down, down, down. He's trying to honor God in all that he's done and has been honoring God. But here he is. He's been sold to Egypt. He was unwise, of course, the way he shared with his brothers, but God has used it all. He's been sold to Egypt. He worked for Potiphar. Potiphar's wife then came. When things were going well, Potiphar's wife came and she held the cloak and got him put into prison. Now he's in prison. He's been elevated in prison. And now, he's confined in there. And these two guys come in to join him. He doesn't know what's going on. So the phrase at the end, he was confined in prison, isn't really the whole truth. It's one part of the story. And what's happening to you today, what's happening to me today, the circumstances in our lives that aren't happening at the speed we'd like them to happen at, it's part of our story. And though to us it looks like we're confined in prison, and you put your own prison, whatever it is you're going through, we're confined in prison. Look, so he put them in custody. This is the Pharaoh, and even Pharaoh's not in charge. God is. Put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in prison, the place where Joseph was confined. I've preached many times. I did recently again over in Ireland. One of the evenings I shared on Zacchaeus. I don't know if I mentioned this point, but one of the things in the story of Zacchaeus climbed the tree. And it's in Luke 19. And there's a little phrase that says, when Jesus came to that place, he stopped. And you can do a little study. There are many of them in Scripture. It talks about that place. But when Jesus got to that place, he stopped. And here, he put them in custody, Genesis 40 verse 3, in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison. That place. I better not laugh because with my run I'm sort of wheezing a little bit. That place where Joseph was confined. The place where Joseph was confined was going to transform into one of the greatest miraculous escapes from prison or deliverance from prison that you would ever know, in that place. And you might be in that place today where you see it as confinement, but God sees it as just getting ready to do an amazing miracle. But it's not all done yet. Joseph's in prison, and the butler and baker have dreams one night. They're very upset. Joseph sees them. This is all through Genesis 40. And Joseph sees them in the morning upset and says, "What's your problem?" They say, "We've had dreams, we don't know what they mean." He says, "Listen, dreams, the answers belong to God. Tell them to me, we'll see what God says." So they tell him their dreams, he gives them the interpretation. The butler is going to be restored to Pharaoh, and the baker hears that story and thinks, "That's a great answer, tell me mine." And he says, "Your head's going to be taken off in 3 days." So not such a good answer. So he says to the butler, "Remember him." Interesting, he doesn't say to the baker to remember him. But anyway, this is what he says to the butler. And it's a sign that God isn't finished preparing Joseph just yet. I've got a B. Interesting, there's a B on my phone. Wonderful. Whoa. All right, he's gone. Okay, so today we're in Genesis chapter 40, verse 14. So before the butler goes, Joseph just adds this. And he doesn't need to, but he does. Let me read it to you. Genesis 40, verse 14. "But remember me when it is well with you. And please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh. And get me out of this house." This is really Joseph. He did the same, of course, when with his brothers, he told them the dreams that he had about them bowing down to him. Those dreams weren't necessarily for Joseph to share. God was revealing to him what was going to happen in the future, but that was between him and God. But God engineered it and worked it, so he ended up in Egypt. But here he wants to make sure when the butler goes, "Now you're blessed, Mr. Butler. You're going to be restored to your position, putting wine in the goblet in the cup of the king again. But I want to make sure that you remember me," because he goes on from this. He says, I was sent here in slavery. I shouldn't even be here. You're in prison for doing things that you did, and you deserve to be here. But listen, I don't. I did nothing wrong. I was falsely accused. I was stolen away from my homeland. So here's what I want you to do. Remember me when it's well with you. And please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh. And get me out of this house. So it shows a little bit of a lack of trust. Now, it's very natural that he would say that, because he would say, "Listen, the butler and the baker, they've come in here. Yes, they had dreams like I had dreams, and God shows me the interpretation of dreams. So I know what God's saying to them. I know what's going to happen. And maybe God sent him in for just this reason. So I'm going to make sure he does what I know he should do. Listen, when you go back to Pharaoh, you tell him, you have a word with him, because I shouldn't be here. And I'm still a bit angry that I'm here." So Joseph had not resolved in his own heart the fact that God was in control yet. And so he's trying to engineer things himself to make it possible that he would get out of there. He's trying to answer his own prayers. And it's so easy for us to do that. And if he could do that, of course, God will just let us do that. But God hasn't got him to the place where he needs him yet. God wants Joseph at the place where he will fully trust him. And he's not there quite yet. As I said the other day, sometimes we want to manipulate things and want to make sure that people know. And as a minister, that's very easy to do. I go to missionary conferences where we're asked to say what our needs are. But we can do things. We can do things in emails and in messages and in prayer letters to make sure that people, reminding people that we have needs or that we have certain things. Please do this. Just in case God doesn't tell you, I want to tell you. And so that's what Joseph's doing. Just in case God isn't in control here and he doesn't tell you to talk to Pharaoh, I'm going to tell you. He's got no idea that very soon, not yet, but very soon, Pharaoh's going to have the most distressing dream And he's going to need Joseph, but he doesn't know that yet. The time isn't right yet. And so I suppose the biggest thing we have to leave with God is that in the timing of things, everything that I think should happen, I think it should happen now. I'm an impatient person by nature. Now, I get things done because of that, but there is part of that that's a problem, in that I want it done today. I want to do it now. When I travel with people, and I used to have people would say to me, I'll take photographs for you and I'll do video for you. If somebody says that to me, I want it done there and then. I want the video before I finish the trip. And at times I haven't had the video for months later, and I'm thinking, what? Don't do that. I need it now. Now, that's my problem. I've got to work with that. Some of you might understand that. But when it comes to the things of God, God doesn't work when I tell him to do things, because he already has his own agenda. He's outside time. He knows exactly when he's going to do it. It's now to him. But I've got to just wait. And so I've got to learn to trust him. And here in this verse today, Joseph says, remember me when it's well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house. We're looking at Joseph. I suggested yesterday that he tried to manipulate things, and we all do that at times. If we can answer our own prayers, we'll do it. But sometimes you just got to say, hey, God, you're in control. And it adds to that today. The verse today is Genesis 40, verse 23, which adds on to yesterday's verse, and it's this. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Great, eh? He's thinking, here's the answer to my prayers. I've been praying God to get me out of this place. I've been given dreams. I've never met anybody before that has had dreams apart from me. I was so excited. I told everybody. I might have been immature to do it, but I did it. Here I am, stuck in prison. It's not my fault. And God, you sent in these two people. You gave them dreams. The only two people in my whole life who I've met who've had a dream. Not only that, you told me the interpretation. It was fantastic. Look at this. Isn't this beautiful? Wow. Fantastic. He's thinking, you brought these people into the prison. For goodness sake, what's going on here? So I guess he would have thought, when he said yesterday, remember me when you get to Pharaoh, because I shouldn't be here. Remember me. Remember me to Pharaoh. Get me out of this place. Show kindness to me. When he said that yesterday, I guess that day he expected to get out. I would think he maybe thought, by the weekend, better have a shave. I'll be out of here. Don't know where he expected to go. He obviously wasn't going to go back to Potiphar's house. Were they going to sell him to somebody else? He was a slave after all. So he hadn't thought this thing through, didn't know what was going to happen to him. But here's this definitive statement. Yet, even after all that happened and the baker was killed, the butler was restored, everything's back, hunky-dory, he's working for the king. Yet, the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Well, of course, Joseph doesn't know, he's not being told that the butler forgot him. He's just being ignored. Time is just going and he's been ignored. So I want you to think about that this morning. Sometimes when God calls us to do things, particularly for those of you who have moved out into ministry, if you're working as a pastor, when you're working as a pastor, the problem you have is that you've got too many people. So if you're a people person, your problem is different from those of us who work in a traveling ministry or in some form of ministry that's called us away from the church that we were in. I remember sitting with one of my pastor friends and his phone went. We were having coffee together and the phone went all the time. And he was getting frustrated with it. Put it away, but he was frustrated. He says, that phone never stops. And I said to him, my phone never rings. And he sat and looked at me in shock and disbelief. I said, my phone never rings. Do I want it to ring? No, it's not. That wasn't what I was saying to him. I was just trying to get him to see that actually, when I've been with some pastors, they want the phone to ring. Because if the phone doesn't ring, they sometimes feel forgotten. And if your phone doesn't ring, if you've gone into some area where it's new to you, you might feel forgotten. If people aren't contacting you, aren't looking at, finding out what you're doing, you can feel forgotten. And you don't know you're forgotten, you just aren't contacted. And that's the way it was with Joseph. And so for the first day, it was probably all right. He probably went to bed and thought, maybe tomorrow. Second day, maybe tomorrow. Third day, by the weekend. You know, when 3, 4, 5 days have gone along, scratched it on the wall of his prison, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as he scratched it along the wall thinking, a week or two, this ain't gonna happen. The guy's totally forgotten me. That's where trust comes in. Because I want to tell you something, that though people will forget you, God never will. Though you might think people are not interested in you, God always is. And particularly in our social media world where contact is everything, likes are everything, following is everything. In that context, we've got to realize that God doesn't send us a follow or a tick or a heart emoji every day. We've got to know that He loves us. And there will be times of silence, times when we don't understand what's going on. And at those times, we've got to trust Him. So if you're feeling forgotten this morning, maybe by your family, maybe you live on your own, maybe forgotten by your grandchildren, maybe forgotten by your church, I want to say it's okay. God's still in control. So let me read the verse again. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. This is our 4th day up in Osmotherley, and I'm still walking around thinking about Joseph. And I said yesterday about being forgotten. Sometimes if we feel forgotten, it's a horrible experience when you feel forgotten. And Joseph felt that. But when it happens for a day or two, that's okay. But let me read today's verse. Genesis 41 verse 1. It says, Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by the river. And then we'll look at what happens after that tomorrow. But it's that phrase, at the end of 2 full years. Why does it say 2 full years? 2 years is 2 years. But the Bible's emphasizing something here. It came to pass at the end of 2 full years. See, a day was long enough for Joseph. He thought he was getting out. Then a week, then a fortnight, then a month. He knows it's not going to happen. But my goodness, nobody else has been sent in to have a dream. How ironic that those 2 guys came in and they've totally forgotten him, or the butler's totally forgotten him. And so when 2 full years passed, Pharaoh had a dream. Now, it was all about Pharaoh having a dream. It was all about Joseph being promoted to the place where he could save God's people. That's what it was all about from the very beginning. That's what the dreams that Joseph had were about, but he didn't know that. He had no idea what God was doing. And so this is all a mystery to him. And the way God was going to use Pharaoh. Pharaoh didn't know that God was going to use him to save his people. Nobody knew any of that. God works on a need-to-know basis. But this was always God's plan. He knew that in 2 years' time, and so Joseph was going to stay there 2 years. Did God manipulate that? I don't know. Joseph was at the place, we looked at the verse where he said to the butler, remember me when you get out, because I shouldn't be here. I was put in here unjustly. Please remember me, show kindness to me. And how he tried to answer the prayer himself. Maybe God left them there a bit longer so that he could change Joseph, or Joseph could say, listen, I thought I could do this. I thought God had answered my prayer by sending the butler to me. I reminded him, I did everything that I could do and none of it has worked. So maybe throughout 2 years, he has been so, I wouldn't say defeated. I don't think that's the right word, but so defeated in his own strength that he said, God, I can't do anything. I believe he'd have come to the place where he said, God, unless you do it, I cannot. I'm sunk, I'm snookered unless you do it. I'm going to be here forever unless you do a miracle. And it took 2 full years for Joseph, I believe, to get to that place. Now he's fully trusting God. Now he knows whatever happens, God's going to work. So when 2 full years had passed, Pharaoh had a dream. And in the dream, he's standing by a river. So God now is about to do a miracle that nobody could dream, could think about. And he was fully in control of that from the very beginning. Now, Joseph doesn't know this yet. I don't know if he's able to count the time in prison. 2 years have gone. Terrible for him. He doesn't know if he'll ever get out, but he's working with the captain of the guard. He's still looking after the prison. He's still doing a good job. He's still honoring where he is. God is, I guess, speaking to him, ministering to him as he does what he does. But he doesn't think he'll ever get out. And then God moves. Listen, folks, when we get to our lowest, when we get to the place where we think, I can't do this anymore, maybe that's when God says, right, now I've got you where I need you. You were trying to do it in your own strength. You were trying to work out your own answers. I want you to realize something. You can't do it. You're not in control here. And that's a hard thing for those of us who are control people, who like to be. I like to be in control. It's part of my personality. I like to be in control. For sure, I know that. Now I know that that God's working on me, and I am getting better than I was. But I like to know what's going on. I like to be in charge. I like to say, right, this is that, that is that. That's just the way my makeup. But I've got to realize that, hey, when you're dealing with God and when you're dealing with God leading your life, we have to leave room and say, God, I can't answer this. Only you can. So at the end of 2 full years, when his self-ability is gone, his own wisdom, his own knowledge, his own way of doing things have not worked. Joseph, if you like, has died to himself. Wow. That's like what happened to Paul. You know, Paul died to himself, but lived to Christ. In a sense, we have an Old Testament version here of this, where Joseph, he died to himself after 2 years. Now God can move. And so he's given a dream to Pharaoh, and that dream is going to cause the butler to remember, going to cause Joseph to come out, and going to cause a tremendous deliverance for the people of God. You know, when we read the story of Joseph, it's a wonderful one that looks at the way God blesses his people, for sure. But the biggest thing it shows is the sovereignty of God, how God is in control, and we need to just trust him.